In parts 1 to 3 of this series of videos, we examined all the evidence which clearly points to the Jabal al-Lawz and Jabal Makla peaks in northwest Saudi Arabia as being the biblical Mount Sinai. We demonstrated that the Bible, when read correctly, identifies the Gulf of Aqaba as the sea the Israelites crossed, and that the Bible even places the wilderness of Shur to the east of that gulf. Using phonetics as a tool, we also demonstrated that the Khwari Khwatir is more correctly to be read Khwari Khirat, this being the biblical Pi Hachirot. We even demonstrated how the meaning of Khirat aptly describes the predicament that the Israelites were in when they were trapped on Nuweiba beach. Meanings such as difficult or critical situation, difficulty, trouble, plight, predicament, awkward position, dilemma, fix, jam, embroilment or bad entanglement. We also examined in detail some of the arguments being put forward both against this crossing point and against the identification of this place in northwest Saudi Arabia as the biblical Mount Sinai, many of those objections being based on incorrect interpretations of the biblical text. We shall now continue by looking at where the Israelites went after leaving Mount Sinai. So, we have traced the route of the Exodus as far as Mount Sinai in northwest Saudi Arabia. From there, the Israelites went north. We are told in Deuteronomy 1 verse 2 that there are 11 days' journey from Horeb by the way of Mount Seir unto Kadesh-Barnea. This verse is a little confusing because the English translation suggests that they went past Mount Seir. The words Derech ha-Seir, which are here translated as by the way of Mount Seir, can also be translated as through, towards, on the way to, or in the direction of Mount Seir. The Septuagint says, "It is a journey of 11 days from Horeb to Mount Seir, as far as Kadesh-Barnea." This suggests that Kadesh-Barnea was located en route to Mount Seir, as opposed to Mount Seir being en route to Kadesh-Barnea. The relevance of making this point will become clear later in this video. We shall demonstrate that the translation provided in the Septuagint is more accurate than our English translation of the Hebrew. A few verses later, in Deuteronomy 1 verse 19, we are told, "And we journeyed from Horeb and went through all that great and dreadful wilderness which you saw, by the way of the mountain of the Amorites, as the Lord our God commanded us. And we came to Kadesh-Barnea." The words translated as by the way of the mountain of the Amorites are once again Derech har ha-Amori, which can be better translated as on the way to the mountain of the Amorites, especially as the very next verse, verse 20, states that they actually arrived at the mountain of the Amorites. Note that you don't go by way of a place in order to get to that place. One of the problems with biblical Hebrew is that it can be interpreted a number of ways, depending on the context in which the words are used. Nevertheless, we now have a clear statement that they ended up in the mountains of the Amorites. When in Numbers 13 verse 29 we are told that the Amorites dwelt in the mountains, it is referring to the mountains of Lebanon. On this map, which has been drawn up by archaeologists studying correspondence discovered at the ancient city of Mara in Mesopotamia, you will see that the Amorites, who are here called Amuru, dwelt in this mountainous region. If you know your Bible, you will know that Sichon, king of the Amorites, dwelt in Heshbon. Tel Chazban, the traditional site of Heshbon, dates no earlier than the Roman period, and is too far north to be the city of this name which existed during the time of Moses. In fact, when you study what the Bible says, the Bible places Heshbon to the south of Medeba, and not far from the city of Aroer. The modern-day Dibon is likewise nowhere near where the Bible locates Dibon. In fact, I would go so far as to suggest that the city archaeologists are identifying as Dibon might be the ancient city of Heshbon. According to the Bible, the river Arnon was the Amorites' southern border. For the river Arnon is the border of Moab between Moab and the Amorites, we are told in the book of Numbers. We are likewise told that the river Jabbok was their northern border, the Jabbok appearing in the Authorized Version as Jabbok. And they, that is Israel, possessed all the coasts of the Amorites from Arnon even unto Jabbok, and from the wilderness even unto Jordan. Note that this land to the east of the river Jordan is called a wilderness. This was the land in which the tribes of Gad and Reuben settled, because it was good pasturage for their cattle. This wilderness was not an arid desert region. The Hebrew word for a dry arid region is aravah, whilst the word midbar, which is translated as wilderness, simply means a wild, uninhabited, uncultivated place, and also includes land fit for pasturage. In Isaiah 35 verse 1, for example, we see that the words midbar and aravah are both used in the same verse, and yet have different meanings. We shall come back to this point in part 5 of this series of videos, where I demonstrate that the Israelites were instructed to build their tabernacles out of boughs of thick trees and willows of the brook, neither of which can be found in dry, arid desert conditions. The river Jabbok was Reuben and Gad's northern border, which border was unto the uttermost part of the Sea of Kinneret, that is the Sea of Galilee, beyond the Jordan eastward. The river Zarka has been wrongly identified as the river Jabbok. Note that the place where the river Zarka joins the river Jordan is nowhere near the Sea of Galilee. Let's take a moment to look more closely at this name Jabbok. It should be noted that the letters M, B, V and P were often interchangeable in the Assyrian, Persian, Celtic, Gaelic, Brittonic and Hebrew languages. For examples from the Hebrew, consider the following. When Hezekiah, king of Judah, was sick unto death, we are told that the Chaldean king sent him some letters and a present, presumably to wish him well. This Chaldean king, who is called Marduk-apla-iddina in the Assyrian records, is called Merodach-baladan in Isaiah 39 verse 1, but Berodach-baladan in 2 Kings 20 verse 2. Note that Merodach becomes Berodach in the Book of Kings. Notice also that the P in the Assyrian becomes a B when transliterated into Hebrew. The Moabite city of Dibon is called Dimon by Isaiah. Once again, note that the letter B, that is a Hebrew letter bet, becomes an M, that is a mem. After Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans, the Sanhedrin moved to a place called both Yamnia and Yabneh, both names being used interchangeably in the Talmud. As you can see, there are a number of examples to draw from. The river Jabbok is still to this day called the Jabbok, but because it is written Yarmuk, no one makes the obvious connection. The river Yarmuk is the biblical Jabbok. Note that it flows into the river Jordan just south of the Sea of Galilee. This then was Reuben and Gad's northern border. For Yarmuk, read Yarbuk, read Jabbok. The adding or dropping of the letter R in pronunciation is also well attested in phonetics. According to Joshua 15 verse 3, in all the translations I have looked at, we are told that Judah's southern border went southwards from the southern tip of the Dead Sea, here called the Salt Sea, and ascended up to a place called Akrabim, and then to Zin, and then to Kadesh-Barnea. Nevertheless, despite all of these translations, including the Septuagint, saying that the border went out southwards, the Hebrew says Minegev, which more correctly means from the south. Numbers 34 verse 4 again uses the word Minegev when it says that your border shall turn from the south to the ascent of Akrabim and continue on to Zin, and then effectively around and to the south of Kadesh-Barnea. When you put both passages together, it is saying that Akrabim was somewhere to the north of the southern end of the Dead Sea, which means that both the wilderness of Zin, which is not to be confused with the similarly named wilderness of Sin, as well as Kadesh-Barnea, were further north of that again. Note that in Judges 1 verse 36, we are told that the Amorites' border was from the ascent of Akrabim from some unidentified rock upwards, meaning northwards. Having identified the river Arnon as being the Amorite southern border, this would then also place Kadesh-Barnea somewhere in the north of the country. As already stated, the Amorites were called Amuru in correspondence discovered at the ancient city of Mare in Mesopotamia, which city on this map was located here. And this is where, according to that correspondence, the Amorites were at that time dwelling. During the time of Moses, they were also dwelling here between the river Arnon and the river Jabbok. When the Israelites set out from Mount Sinai and travelled to Kadesh-Barnea, they travelled through this land of the Amorites and ended up here in Syria. Now, the route they took might have been slightly different to this. They might, for example, have taken the King's Highway to Palmyra and then travelled westward to this spot. But this is roughly where they went after leaving the mountain of God. Now we come to the interesting part. Kadesh-Barnea means literally the city of Kadesh in the land of Barnea. This is in the same way that Josephus called Ramat Gilead the Galadine city of Arametta. The people of this land of Barnea are the people the Assyrians called Barnacanes. Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, informs us that these Barnacanes were known to the Mechranu as Pitanians. We know the Mechranu, a name which was sometimes written Mechrani, as a tribe of people descended from Machir, son of Manasseh. During the time of Adad-Nirari II, an earlier king of Assyria who lived before the deportation of the northern 10 tribes, these Mechrani were dwelling in the land which the Assyrians called Mechri, and which we know from the Bible as the land of Gilead. This is where the Bible tells us the tribe of Machir, son of Manasseh, was at that time dwelling, which means that the Assyrian names Mechri and Mechrani are derived from this name Machir. So these Barnacanes mentioned by Esarhaddon dwelt in the land of Barnea. Here the letter Ayin of Barnea has been transliterated as a K to produce Barnakea. This Hebrew letter is a guttural, and when transliterated into other languages can become a G or a K. Pitan is a variant spelling of Padan, as in Padan Aram, that is Padan of Syria. The land of Barnea was therefore located in Syria. It can be shown that Kadesh was the ancient name for the city, which in later times was known as Carchemish, though this would take too long to explain here, other than to say that this is the city of Kadesh which Ramses II laid siege to. Having identified Ramses II as Pharaoh Necho II, we see that the city Ramses II called Kadesh is the city called Carchemish in the Bible. If you want to know more, you might want to read Chapter 9 of my book, Ancient History Reconsidered, which you can download in PDF format from my website for free. The name Padan appears a number of times in the book of Genesis, but nowhere else in the Bible. The word Paran appears 11 times in the Bible, twice in the book of Genesis. as Paran in Genesis 14 verse 6 and as Paran in Genesis 21 verse 21, this being, according to the latter passage, the place where Ishmael dwelt. In Paleo-Hebrew, the Dalet and the Resh are almost identical. Consequently, these two Hebrew characters have been confused when the scribes who returned from Babylon and Persia restored the records from the fire-damaged documents. There are a number of places in the Bible where these two Hebrew characters have been confused. For example, Chamdan, son of Duke Dishon, in Genesis 36 verse 26 becomes Chamran in 1 Chronicles 1 verse 41. Eliasaph, the son of Deuel, appears in various parts of the book of Numbers, but in Numbers 2 verse 14 this same person is called son of Ruel. I would go so far as to suggest that Ruel is the correct reading. Dodanim, son of Yaakan, in Genesis 10 verse 4 becomes Rodanim in 1 Chronicles 1 verse 7, though despite showing Rodanim in the Hebrew, the Authorized Version correctly has Dodanim. Riphat, son of Gomer, in Genesis 10 verse 3 likewise becomes Diphat in 1 Chronicles 1 verse 6, though again, despite showing Diphat in the Hebrew, the Authorized Version correctly has Riphat. Similarly, in the Septuagint we have, in Numbers 33 verses 12 to 13, Dovka appears as Raphakah. In Genesis 36 verse 21, Duke Dishon is called Rison. In 3 Kings 11 verse 14, this being equivalent to the entry in 1 Kings 11 verse 14 in the Authorized Version, Hadad the Edomite is called Adair. Josephus likewise transliterated this name as Adair or Adaron. In Numbers 33 verses 16 and 17, we are told that when they left Mount Sinai, here called Wilderness of Sinai, they first camped at a place called Kibrot Hata'avah, a name which means the graves of those who lusted. From there they travelled first to Hatzerot and then to Ritmah. Compare this statement, and they departed from Hatzerot and pitched in Ritmah, with, and afterward the people journeyed from Hatzerot and pitched in the wilderness of Paran. Bear in mind that the wilderness of Paran is more correctly the wilderness of Padan. In the Assyrian records, Ritmah appears as Ratamatu, a place which was also known as Gidara. According to Adad-Nirari II, king of Assyria, this city of Ritmat/Ratamatu was located in the land of Khani-Galbat. The land of Khani-Galbat was located in North Syria and included the region known as Padan Aram, this being the wilderness of Paran referred to in the Bible. So what initially appears to be a contradiction turns out not to be. Bearing in mind that the Assyrian records place the land of Barnea in Syria, it is interesting to note that the Bible quite clearly states that the men Moses sent to spy out the land of Canaan entered the promised land from the north. In Numbers 13 verses 21 and 22 we read, "So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin unto Rehob at the entrance to Hamath. And they went up into the south and came unto Hebron." Note that Hamath was in Syria, and Rehob was part of Asher's inheritance located somewhere by Mount Carmel in northern Israel. Hebron was in southern Judea. It was located to the south of Jerusalem. Notice that in the above translation I have translated the Hebrew as saying that the spies went up into the south, which is what the Hebrew actually says, and is how the Mechon Mamre organization have translated the verse. With this idea that the spies entered the promised land from the south, Most modern translators have translated this passage as though the spies entered from the south. But this would not make sense, as it clearly says that they came down from Rehob and Hamat, both places being located in the north of the country. So this is roughly where Hamat was located. This is roughly where Rehob was located. And this is where Hebron was located. The spies therefore roughly followed this route. The spies therefore journeyed from the north into the south. Josephus, however, would have us believe that the spies entered from the south, the opposite of what the Bible says. These, starting from the Egyptian frontier, traversed Canaan from end to end, reached the city of Hamat and Mount Libanus, and after fully exploring the nature of the country and of its inhabitants, returned, having spent 40 days over the whole task. It is obvious that neither Josephus nor the Jews who returned from Babylon and Persia knew where many of these places were located. After all, there were no signposts saying this is the wilderness of Paran or Padan, and many of the cities mentioned had by then been razed to the ground by the Assyrian and Chaldean armies. Even Ptolemy called the Sinai Peninsula the Paran promontory, which tells us that the Jews of that time believed that this was the wilderness of Paran. Yet many people follow the works of Josephus rather than what the Bible says, and as a consequence believe that Israel spent 40 years wandering round and round in circles in the Sinai Peninsula. I am about to demonstrate just how ludicrous this belief actually is. Notice also that the wilderness of Zin was in Syria. This means that the entry in Joshua 15 verse 1, which states that Zin was in the south of the country and was part of Judah's southern border, is problematic. I shall provide a more suitable alternative translation for this verse in part 5 of this series of videos. In Deuteronomy 1 verse 1 we read, "These are the words which Moses spoke unto all Israel beyond the Jordan, in the wilderness in the Arabah, over against Suf, between Paran and Tophel and Laban and Hazeroth and the Zahav." The land of Laban was named after Laban the Syrian, who was brother-in-law to Isaac and was Jacob's father-in-law. In Genesis 28 verses 2 and 5, we are told that Laban lived in Padan Aram, a name which means Padan in Syria. Shamshi-Adad I, king of Assyria, tells us that the land of Laban was on the shore of the Great Sea, that is, the Mediterranean. Tophel appears in the Assyrian records as Tabal, a land which Shalmaneser III conquered after crossing the Euphrates and before advancing on the Taurus Mountains of Anatolia. The interchange of the P and B in ancient languages has already been discussed, and is a well-attested phonetic phenomenon. The Assyrian king Shalmaneser III wrote, "In my 22nd year of reign I crossed the Euphrates for the 22nd time. Against the land of Tabal I descended. At that time I received the presents of 24 kings of Tabal. To Mount Tuni, that is the Taurus Mountains of Anatolia, the Silver Mountain, and Mount Muli, the Marble Mountain, I advanced." The meaning of Di Zahav is obscure, apart from the fact that Zahav means gold. In the Septuagint, Di Zahav is translated as gold works, from kata meaning down and chrysos meaning gold. We seem therefore to be talking about a gold mine, though apparently the ancient Greek word for gold mine is chrysaea. No matter how you interpret the word Di Zahav, it is important to understand that we are talking about a land where gold was extracted. According to the Assyrian records, The land of gold was located somewhere in this region of North Syria, somewhere between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. This then was the biblical Di-Zahav. This means that the latter part of Deuteronomy 1 verse 1 has been inserted in the wrong place. They may have been appropriate when the Israelites were camped at Kadesh-Barnea, but not when Moses was addressing the Israelites to the east of the river Jordan. Shortly after the spies returned from the Promised Land, we are told that, against the advice of Moses, Israel tried to take possession of the land by their own initiative. As a consequence, they suffered heavy casualties. Then the Amalekite and the Canaanite, who dwelt in that hill country, came down and smote them, and beat them down even unto Hormah. In another place, these Amalekites and Canaanites are called Amorites. And the Amorites which dwelt in that mountain came out against you and chased you as bees do, and destroyed you in Seir even unto Hormah. I identify this place Hormah as the city called Cheremu in the Assyrian records, a city which was located in southern Babylonia. Note that this particular Hormah is not to be confused with the similarly named place called Hormah in southern Israel, mentioned in Joshua 12 verse 14 and Judges 1 verse 17. Bear in mind that Cheremu is the Assyriologist's assumed transliteration of the name from the Assyrian cuneiform. The cities of Cheremu and Cherutu, fortresses of the land of Karduniash, that is Babylonia, I have added unto the border of my land, wrote Ashurnasirpal II. The reason for making this claim will become evident in a moment. After Kadesh-Barnea, a lot of the campsites mentioned in Numbers 33 are unknown. In fact, there are far too many of them. It seems to me that many of them are duplications. It should be noted, for example, that the name Kadesh-Barnea does not appear in the list of campsites mentioned in this chapter. This means that Kadesh-Barnea is recorded under a different name. Kadesh-Barnea is also called Wilderness of Paran, Meribah Kadesh, which is where Moses for a second time struck a rock so that water gushed out, and Ritmah. This means that Kadesh-Barnea appears as Ritmah in Numbers chapter 33 verses 18 and 19. The scribes did not realize that these were alternative names for the same place. It doesn't help that the early chapters of the book of Numbers jump straight from when the men were sent from Kadesh-Barnea to spy out the land in Numbers chapter 13 to Aaron's death in chapter 20, missing out 11 of the campsites mentioned in Numbers 33. This would suggest that either there is a huge chunk of this book missing, or alternatively, that many of the campsites mentioned are simply alternative names for campsites already mentioned. Remember that the scribes who returned from Babylon and Persia under the leadership of Ezra and Nehemiah had to restore the information from a number of different fire-damaged documents, Jerusalem having been burnt to the ground when Nebuchadnezzar had taken the city. Similarly, Deuteronomy chapter 10 jumps straight from talking about Moses receiving a second set of tablets at Mount Sinai in verses 1 to 5 to listing campsites which were halfway through the list contained in Numbers 33, completely omitting 13 of the campsites. This is assuming that Hashmonah is identifiable as Bnei Yaakan, a place also called Beerot of Bnei Yaakan in Deuteronomy 10 verse 6, a name which means wells of the sons of Yaakan. Note that this passage tells us that they camped at this place before arriving at Moserah. Hashmonah does not appear anywhere else in the Bible, and I have not found any reference to this place in the Assyrian records either. These sons of Yaakan are identifiable as the Bit Yaakin of the Assyrian texts. They dwelt in southern Babylonia. This is where the city of Cherimu was located. If you can recall, we are identifying this city as Hormah, this being the place to where the Israelites were chased after attempting to take possession of the Promised Land after disobeying the word of the Lord. The name Bit Yaakin means house of Yaakan. These sons of Yaakan were descended from Duke Yaakan, who is said to have been a son of Edser, son of Seir. In Genesis 36 verse 27, this Edomite duke is called Akan. Whilst Bnei Yaakan is usually written as one word, in Deuteronomy 10 verse 6, the translators have decided to more correctly translate Bnei Yaakan as children of Yaakan, calling the campsite Beerot, that is wells, of the children of Yaakan. It seems to me that Kehelata and Harada, mentioned in Numbers 33 verses 23 to 25, are the same places mentioned by Tukulti-Ninurta II, king of Assyria, who tells us that, "In Harada I spent the night." Harada lies on the other side of the Euphrates. "From Harada I departed. In Kehelata I spent the night." I see the name Kehelata as being the Assyrian form of the name Kehelata. These two places mentioned by the Assyrian king, Harada and Kehelata, were located in Mesopotamia, possibly somewhere close to where the sons of Yaakan were located, and one of these could simply be an alternative name for this sons of Yaakan campsite. This would then mean that many of the names between verses 25 and 30 are out of sequence and are most likely alternative names for some of the other campsites. It is also possible that Rissa, mentioned in Numbers 33 verses 21 and 22, which they camped at before Kehelata, is mentioned in the Assyrian records under the name Rashi, with Sargon II, king of Assyria, informing us that this place was located somewhere on the river Tigris. The Jews who returned from Babylon and Persia would not have known how these names would have been pronounced. What has been read as Risa could also be transliterated as Rasa, this being closer to the Assyrian. The same goes for the reading from the Assyrian. Who is to say that the word we are reading as Rashi was not pronounced Resi? Obviously, this identification of Risi with Rashi of the Assyrian records is conjecture, but I thought it worth mentioning. After the encampment at the wells of the sons of Yaakan, Moses led Israel to a place called Moserah, where we are told that Aaron died. This place is called Moserot in Numbers 33 verse 30, but Mount Hor in Numbers chapter 20. According to the list of campsites mentioned in Numbers 33, they camped at this place twice, and it was on their second visit that Aaron died and was buried there. The statement in Deuteronomy 10 verse 6 that Aaron died at Moserah is wrongly placed in this part of the Bible, as this text is describing their first visit to that place. Returning to our map of Mesopotamia, first of all note the name Edomares, a name which means Edom land, the Aras part of the name being equivalent to the Hebrew word Eretz, a word which means land. In my opinion, archaeologists have placed this land of Edom too far to the east, and that it should more correctly be over here. Nevertheless, this will not affect the arguments being put forward here. The fact is that the Jews who returned from Babylon and Persia were unaware of this northern land of Edom. According to the Assyrian records, the sons of Yaakan were at that time dwelling somewhere in this region in southern Babylonia. Moserah or Moserot appears in the Assyrian records as Mount Musri, a mountain which, according to Sargon II, king of Assyria, was located above Nineveh. Sargon too built his city Dur-Shurukin at the base of this mountain. The village of Khorsabad today stands on the city's remains. So this is roughly the route that Moses must have taken to get to Mount Hor. It's a bit different from what you have been taught, isn't it? The Lord told Moses, "And this shall be your north border. From the great sea that is the Mediterranean, you shall mark out your line unto Mount Hor." So if you draw a line from the Mediterranean to Mount Hor, allowing for the curvature of the earth, you will see that the line crosses the river Euphrates just to the south of Carchemish, this being the city which was anciently known as Kadesh. Kadesh is Hebrew for holy city, whilst Carchemish means city of the Moabite god Chemosh. Where this line crosses the Euphrates, this was Israel's northern border. If I am right about my identification of Risa as the place called Rashi in the Assyrian records, then this campsite must have been located somewhere here. Hopefully you can now appreciate just how ludicrous the idea that they spent 40 years wandering round and round the Sinai Peninsula actually is. Note that Josephus believed that Mount Hor was the hill on which the Edomite city of Petra stood. He wrote, "After a purification held in such wise in consequence of the mourning for the sister of their chief, that is Miriam, he led his forces away through the desert and came to a place in Arabia which the Arabs have deemed their metropolis, formerly called Arche, today named Petra. There Aaron ascended a lofty mountain range that encloses the spot, Moses having revealed to him that he was about to die. And in the sight of the whole army, for the ground was steep, he divested himself of his high priestly robes, and after delivering them to Eleazar his son, upon whom by right of age the high priesthood descended, he died with the eyes of the multitude upon him." So if we go by what Josephus tells us, this is where Petra is located. This is what he identified as being the biblical Mount Hor. The Bible tells us in Numbers 34 verse 7 to mark out a line from the Mediterranean to Mount Hor, and that this will be Israel's northern border. As you can see, if we do this, no matter where we draw the line to the southern land of Edom, the northern border falls towards Israel's southern border, which effectively means that the land of Israel almost ceases to exist. Josephus clearly did not know where Mount Hor was located. The Jews of that period likewise believed that Aaron's burial place was located in this southern land of Edom, claiming that the Mount Hor which was used as a demarcation line for their northern border was a different Mount Hor to the one where Aaron was laid to rest. But we have shown this assumption to be unfounded. The Jewish commentator Rashi, for example, thought that this other Mount Hor was somewhere by Antioch. Other commentators, such as Nachmanides, identify Mount Hor with either Mount Hermon or the Amanus Mountains. As I have pointed out, they did not have a clue where many of these places were located. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever why Numbers 34 verse 7 should be referring to a different Mount Hor. The Lord would not give us some vague instructions if it was not intended for us to know where Mount Hor was located. During their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, we are told that the Israelites compassed Mount Seir many days. We can interpret many days as meaning a long time. The Lord says, "I have given Mount Seir unto Esau for a possession." This same statement also appears in the book of Joshua, where the Lord repeats the instruction that he gave unto Esau Mount Seir to possess it. So where precisely then is Mount Seir? We have provided numerous examples of how the Jews who returned from Babylon and Persia during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah did not know where many of these places were located, and were restoring the information according to their limited understanding. It should be noted that Ptolemy called the Sinai Peninsula the Paran promontory. This is because the Jews at that time believed that this is where the wilderness of Paran was located. You will recall that contrary to what the Bible actually says, Josephus would have us believe that the spies who Moses sent to spy out the land entered from the south. He was merely relating what the Jews believed and were teaching at that time. We have shown that the wilderness of Paran is a copying error for wilderness of Padan, and that from there the Israelites travelled through Mesopotamia. So where then is this Mount Seir? Note that the word Seir in Hebrew is written Sin Ayin Yod Resh. So why is this relevant? This letter Sin, when transliterated into other languages, can become a Z. You may recall, for example, that the Bani Zamonas mentioned in part 3 of this video series were sons of Shimon, a people called Simeni by Pliny. We demonstrated in part 2 of this series of videos that the Hebrew letter Ayin can be transliterated as a G, as in Gaza or Gomorrah, both names beginning with this Hebrew letter Ayin. Applying this knowledge to the name Seir, we get Zegir, and with the usual Greek suffix which we find added to the ends of words, Seir becomes Zegir, becomes Zegiros, which, with only a small phonetic change, becomes Zagros. That's right, that 900-mile range of mountains which runs through Armenia, Assyria, Babylonia and Elam, the latter country now known as Iran, that is the biblical Mount Seir. When we look at the peoples inhabiting these mountains in ancient times, we find that they were predominantly of Edomite descent. Most people look at the land of Edom in the south of the country and wrongly get the impression that the Edomites were a small, insignificant family of tribes. By revealing where Mount Seir is actually located, we begin to realize just how powerful and widespread these descendants of Edom became. There are, however, a few problems associated with this claim that Mount Seir is to the north of the land of Israel, which we shall look at in part 5 of this series of videos. But first of all, let's look at the overwhelming evidence to support this identification. When we realize where Mount Seir is actually located, we completely change our whole understanding not only of the Bible, but also of ancient history itself. This identification also confirms the revisions being presented here, which show that the Israelites travelled through Mesopotamia, and that Mount Hor, where Aaron is buried, was to the north of Assyria. In part 5, I shall show that the land of rivers of water mentioned in Deuteronomy 10 verse 7 is the land that we today know from the Greek writers as Mesopotamia. According to the Assyrian records, Jotbat, a name which is written Jotbat in the King James Version and Jotbata in the RSV and NIV translations, was located on the river Chabor in Mesopotamia. Again, this will be covered in part 5. Returning to this name Edomeres, this is mentioned a number of times in correspondence unearthed by George Dawson and his team at the ancient city of Mari in Mesopotamia. This is the city of Mari here on this map. As stated earlier, the name Edomeres literally means Edom land, where the word Aretz is equivalent to the Hebrew word Eretz, meaning land. I am not the only person to make this connection. Another independent researcher by the name of Michael Banyai has also come to the same conclusion. I would, however, contend that this name Idameres should actually apply to the whole of the Zagros range of mountains, and that it has been wrongly placed to the east of Assyria on this map. So let's now go through the names of the various tribes who historically inhabited these mountains, and we shall see how huge this Edomite family actually was. We mentioned earlier the Bit Yaakan who at one time dwelt in southern Babylonia. They appear in the Bible as Bnei Yaakan, written Bene Yaakan in the Authorized Version. This was one of the places of encampment listed in the Exodus journey. This tribe of people were descended from Yaakan son of Edser son of Seir, though in the book of Genesis Yaakan appears as Akan. Note that Bit Yaakan means house of Yaakan in the same way that Bet Yisrael means house of Israel. The Shobaru of the Assyrian records were descended from Duke Shobal, the interchange of the letters R and L in ancient languages being well attested. Note the way the name was variously spelt in the Assyrian records. Notice that the Turuku, who are here shown as dwelling in the Zagros mountains, were also Edomites. This word Turuku is a variant spelling of Turk. I would suggest that the name Turk comes from the name Zerach, this being the name of one of the Edomite dukes. He is not to be confused with the family of Zerach of the tribe of Judah of the same name. The powerful kingdom of Gutium was so named after Duke Gatam, one of the sons of Duke Eliphaz. The similarly powerful kingdom of Sophene was likewise named after the Edomite duke known from the Bible both as Sepho and Sephi. These were the people called Supani in the Assyrian and so-called Hittite texts. Here the Hebrew letter Sadi has become an S in transliteration. The addition of the letter N is also well attested in phonetics. You might want to consider the fact that the city of Megiddo is called Megiddon in Zechariah 12 verse 11, and Armageddon, meaning hill of Megiddo, in Revelation 16 verse 16. It is interesting to note that Gatam and Sepho were brothers. In my opinion, the fact that these territories were geographically adjoining is a good indication that they were closely related. We then had the Temanites who dwelt between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, a people who were clearly descended from Duke Teman, another of the sons of Duke Eliphaz. The Assyrian king Adad-nirari II records campaigns against 3 Temanite chiefs who were dwelling in the land of Mitanni. This land of Mitanni encompassed the whole of this region of North Syria. The Assyrian king even gives us their names. The Greek writer Herodotus called these Temanites Temanaeans, whilst Sargon II, king of Assyria, who attacked the same district, called them Manaeans. This has already been discussed in part 1 of my video, The Phoenicians Who Founded Spain. The Assyrian records make mention of the land of Zikirtu, this name Zikirtu being a variant spelling of Seirite. Strabo called this land of Zikirtu Odomantis, where the name Odomantis is a variation on the name Edomite. Herodotus called the inhabitants of this land Sagartians, this being a variation on the Assyrian name Zikirtu. Pliny, in referring to the very same people, called them Citrae, this being a variant spelling of Satyrs. The name Satyr is actually derived from the Hebrew word Seir, which is not only the name of the father of the Seirites, who were also known as Horites, but is also the Hebrew word for goat. This is why a satyr is often, though not always, depicted as being a creature which is half man and half goat. In Isaiah 13 verse 21 and 34 verse 14, The word Seir is actually transliterated as satir. Note that the Hebrew letter ayin, which I have shown can usually be transliterated as a G, has here become a T in translation. In the Bible, the Horites are also referred to as sons of Seir. In fact, the Horites appear to take their name from Hori, son of Lotan, son of Seir. The people who formed the enigmatic Hurrian kingdom, which at one time ruled in this region here shown on the map, were likewise biblical Horites. As I have just stated, the Horites were descended from Hori, son of Lotan, son of Seir. They were Seirites. Apollonius of Rhodes tells us that Colchis was originally called Aya after his mythical king Aeetes. We know this king Aeetes as Duke Aya, one of the sons of Duke Sibion. Pliny records that Aya was the most famous city in Colchis, and that it was located on the river Phasis, which runs through the land of Colchis. Note, however, that Colchis was named after Calchos, son of Zerach of the tribe of Judah, who was called Chalcias by Josephus. There is no evidence that this land was known as Colchis prior to the time of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. These descendants of Calchol of the tribe of Judah would have arrived in this area after the northern 10 tribes had been taken into captivity. The adjoining country of Iberia was likewise named after these Israelite tribes. Herodotus even records that the Colchians practiced circumcision, this being a biblical commandment connected to the promise the Lord gave to Abraham. This was discussed in part 2 of this current video series. According to the Greek writer Hesiod, Kirke was the sister of King Aeetes of Colchis. Kirke was more correctly a sister tribe. Note that Hesiod is usually said to have lived around the time of the exile of the northern 10 tribes, though I would argue that he lived at a much later date. But for the sake of brevity, we shan't go into that here. The Assyrian records refer to a land of Kirche, which land would, according to those records, have been somewhere in this region, which in later times was known as Colchis, this being to the south of where these Aeons dwelt. This land of Kirche, a name which is written Kirke in the Greek records, would have been named after Duke Korach. There are actually 2 dukes by the name of Korach. The one was a son of Esau's wife Ada and was a brother to Dukes Gatam and Zepho, the same Gatam and Zepho who formed the adjacent kingdoms of Gutium and Sophene. The other was a son of Esau's wife Aholibama. Consequently, King Aeetes is an allegorical representation of the tribe of Aeons named after Duke Aya, whilst Kirke, the sister of this semi-mythical King Aeetes, was a sister tribe named after Duke Korach, most likely the one who was the brother of Dukes Gatam and Zepho. Odysseus, the husband of Kirke, appears to be Duke Dishon, who seems to have given his name to the city of Edessa in Mesopotamia, as well as the city of Odessa on the Black Sea in the Ukraine. We can already start to see the connections here. Josephus tells us that the kings of Syria were of Edomite descent, being descendants of Hadad the Edomite, who lived during the time of King Solomon. When we open our eyes, we see that the Edomite presence in the north is huge. Caucus, from which we get the expression Caucasian, is a variant spelling of the Hebrew name Gog or Agag. The Agagites were Amalekites. In the book of Esther, Haman, the person who intended to annihilate the Jews, is called an Agagite. He was a descendant of Agag, who was king of the Amalekites during the time of Joshua. In Esther 9 verse 24 of the Septuagint, Haman is called a Macedonian. Alexander the Great, who was king of Macedonia, declared himself to be a descendant of Heracles. In my video, The Phoenicians Who Founded Spain, I pointed out that the Heracles were of Edomite descent. I can also reveal that the Macedonians themselves were likewise of Edomite descent. But again, I shan't go into this in this video as it is too big a topic. This will, however, be explained in a separate video when we shall look at the migrations of these various Edomite factions. Basically, these descendants of Amalek had migrated and spread to numerous countries. The fact that these Amalekites were dwelling in Persia is testament to how large a family these Amalekites had become. As you can now hopefully appreciate, this completely changes our understanding and perspective of what the Bible says. We have gone from Edom being a small insignificant family to being a massive powerful presence in the north. Archaeologists are making the very same mistake in underestimating the size of the Israelite population. When we come to look at where these Edomite tribes have migrated to, as I have said, this will have to be a separate video, it might surprise you to learn just how widespread they have become. Now that we have shown precisely where Aaron is buried, we find that it is a few hundred miles away from where the Jews believe he is buried. By identifying where he is actually buried, we have been able to correctly identify the demarcation line of Israel's northern border. The suggestion that the Lord is providing us with incomplete instructions by referring to a different unidentifiable Mount Hor to the one where Aaron is buried is, in my opinion, illogical. The Jewish commentators, such as Rashi and Nachmanides, realized that the biblical passage could not possibly be referring to some location in the southern land of Edom, where they believed Aaron was buried. So they postulated that it must have been some unknown mountain located somewhere in the northern parts of the land of Israel. But why would the Lord be referring to some other unidentifiable Mount Hor? It is important to realize that the scribes had to restore the information from a number of fire-damaged documents, and that they had difficulty understanding what was written in those documents. They could only restore the information according to their limited understanding. It should be stressed that this in no way undermines the authority of the Bible. If you think about it, these errors actually reaffirm the Bible, because it shows that the scribes were restoring the information from documents which predated the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. Whilst not perfect, what they have restored is clearly the best they could have done, considering the condition of the records. Having identified where both Mount Hor and Mount Seir were actually located, we have corrected our understanding of what the Bible is actually telling us. We shall now look at the final part of the Exodus journey, where they went after leaving Mount Hor right up till the time of Moses' death, when they were preparing to enter the Promised Land. We shall also consider some of the many false interpretations being imposed on the biblical narrative, such as the false claims that the Hebrew word midbar means a dry, arid desert, and that Nachal means a valley or wadi or brook. So join me for part 5 of Journey Through the Wilderness for more enlightenment.